Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining us for today's session. So you think you want to be an MSP. For this session, CPL is joined by the Executive Vice President of ProcureWise, James Lucier. But before we jump into today's session, there are a few housekeeping items to cover. First, each session will be recorded and available on demand through CPL's website. A follow-up email will be sent to all registrants with the recording and other relevant materials. Second, we will have a Q&A session following the discussion. So all participants have entered the session muted, but if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to type them in within the questions or the discussion tab to the right of your screen. And finally, we do have a strict schedule today. To save time for our Q&A period, I will give Jim a quick 10-minute, 15-minute warning just to ensure we have enough time to answer any questions that come in. Please note that this session will end promptly at the scheduled time, and at that point, we will actually be funneling individuals into the next session. You will be able to join any session you'd like, though, through the agenda tab at the top of your screen, so you can pick and choose out of the 4 different simultaneous sessions that are happening at that time. And now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, James Lucier. As Executive Vice President, James is responsible for executing go-to-market strategies, building client-driven growth, and driving success for ProcureWise. He has actually co-founded 2 managed service providers and led a staffing firm to a national and global prominence. Jim embraces the transparency needed to build trust and develop valued client relationships, and of course, business partnerships for long-term success. Thank you again, Jim, and we really appreciate you presenting today, and we're all excited to learn a little bit more about what you have in store for us today. The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jay.
Of course.
So, you think you want to be an MSP? That's the title of today's presentation. It's actually a question I asked myself and my CEO at the time about 7 years ago. And in about 30 minutes, I'm going to walk through some of our thought process then, what actually happened, and update things for 2021. So it really all started with this simple idea. On the actually back of a beverage napkin on Southwest Airlines. I almost have forgotten what it's like to travel. Seems like I used to travel every day, and now I don't travel at all. But Southwest was my carrier of choice, and one day I was making some notes on the back of a napkin, thinking about actually on my way to our corporate office, thinking about what we could do to expand our business and new business plans for the following year. And something had just been in the back of my mind and really came forward just as clearly as this, where you see sort of screaming out of the middle there, MSP. Could we become an MSP? And what would that look like? What would we have to do to start an MSP and be successful? So to fast forward that a little bit, I'll tell you that simple idea turned into what is today an MSP that's managing more than $1 billion in spend. So part of the simple idea was something that I had thought about for quite a while. It actually goes back to a book I read called Blue Ocean Strategy. I'd recommend it to everyone. There's also a second book out. I think it's something like Shifting to a Blue Ocean Strategy. And just for a quick discussion on it. So a red ocean is where most of us who are in the staffing business are used to being, right? We're in a crowded market. The competition is literally bloody red. And we're always involved, always in intense competition, some of the same competitors, some new competitors, lots of competitors, always competing for business, pushing down pricing and profit. it's sort of like the necessary evil, if you will, right, to build staffing businesses. But what if we had a staffing business that where we were doing well in the red ocean and we could somehow get into a blue ocean? What is a blue ocean? A blue ocean is where there's opportunities for growth and profitability without that same type of competition. A blue ocean strategy is where we can create or satisfy some new demand. It's where we can really go into untapped markets, right? Instead of fighting over, fighting over business that where the market already exists. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, how we can actually move from a red ocean to a blue ocean. But really, this is sort of how I see it, is that we're in the red ocean in staffing, but we can get to the blue ocean by building an MSP practice from a staffing firm. And we can actually even build our staffing business by doing so. So this shift, though, I think requires something else. So if we move ahead here, I'm going to talk about edge strategy. So this was another idea from a book that I read, and I'm going to read part of this here. It's a very familiar business mantra: focus on your core, or maybe stick to your knitting, or things like that. Okay, but if you see the highlighted section, let's go through that, or the bold section. But in scanning the horizon for new markets and new products, companies overlook an enormous untapped source of profit that exists in the near field, on the edge of the core business, through the sale of ancillary goods and services that actually make a customer's interaction with the business more complete. And I put here this depiction of the workforce solutions ecosystem from SIA. As a staffing firm, your business is at the core of the workforce solutions ecosystem. But there's opportunity all around the edge of the business, right? And so why is that opportunity? Why is the edge strategy such a dynamic way to take advantage of some of the opportunities around the edge of the staffing business, for instance, like building an MSP practice? Well, the reasons are: you can use existing capabilities. You can use existing resources. You may even be able to use existing channels for customers and potential customers. So because of those types of reasons, you can move a lot faster to the edge than you can into a completely different business. That move to the edge is less costly than starting a completely different business. And that move can be more profitable, again, because you're able to leverage some capabilities and some resources that you already have. So let's talk about MSP for a little bit. And as I often do, I'm going to just start with the definition, because I think it's important that we're speaking a common language now as we move forward in the presentation and into the Q&A. And also, as I often do, I'm going to be using as a source for this slide and the next several slides, Staffing Industry Analyst. I'm very grateful that the companies and CEOs that I've worked with over the years have been big supporters of SIA and funded the membership for our companies and for me to take advantage of the many programs and events that they have. But in addition to that, all the opportunities to really learn from their research. And we're going to consider some of their research here over the next few minutes. But I would really recommend that in terms of evaluating anything that you want to do with your staffing firm, that if you're a member of SIA, you have tremendous access to information that can be really valuable. And even if you're not a member yet, there's a lot of information that you can access as well. Anyway, what is an MSP? A company that takes on primary responsibility. So I bold that, primary responsibility for managing an organization's contingent workforce program. Typical responsibilities include the things that you already know about with MSPs. And of course, MSPs will work with the vendor management system almost all the time, right, to deliver the managed services. The last sentence I also bolded. An MSP can also be responsible for the client's direct sourcing and may or may not be independent of a staffing supplier. I think that that's really a key point. The largest MSPs, many of them are not independent of a staffing supplier. Certainly some are, but some aren't, right? And we know that one of the reasons, probably the primary reason, that some of the largest MSPs were started by some of the largest staffing firms. And that reason is to have the direct client relationship. So let's look at some of the research from SIA. So one of the things that's available is the MSP and VMS provider directory for 2020. What can we learn from that? Well, here are several key observations, at least for me. There are 141, or I say approximately, in the event that perhaps I miscounted, but we'll say 140 or so total is the total number of providers in the directory. 107 of those are MSPs. So some of the rest of the providers are only VMSs and don't offer MSP services. And so what's important about that number? Well, think about it. I mean, if you're a staffing firm, you may be in some programs competing with that many suppliers in one program. You may compete with that many suppliers for one category or even one rec in one program. What we're talking about here, and I'm not saying that every MSP is in that directory, but it certainly is a comprehensive directory. And so instead of having 107 firms that you'd be competing against for one rec in the staffing business, there are only 107 MSPs that we're looking at across the entire landscape. And on the third point there, many of them are focused outside the US. They're not focused in the US at all. Others that are in the US are very narrowly focused in a single vertical, healthcare being one of those, manufacturing being another, financial services being another. So when you start to look at different verticals, you see less competition. When you're looking in the US, of course, we're seeing less competition. Others are just starting up. And as I already noted, a large number are tied to staffing firms, whether they're some of the largest MSPs and largest staffing firms, or whether they're startup MSPs with other staffing firms. I think all of those points are really important to consider when you think, is this really an opportunity? Can you be a staffing firm today and build an MSP practice? What does it look like what does the landscape look like, right? So there's another report from SIA. This is also the most current one. Another thing that's very nice about the SIA research is generally it's updated, oftentimes annually, sometimes even quarterly. So recently in preparing for this, I've read both the 2019 and the 2020 landscape summary. But here are some key observations from the most recent one. Less than half of the spend is in vendor neutral MSP. So less than half of the spend that MSPs manage is vendor neutral. What does that mean to you? It means that staffing firms are still very important. Again, if we think about the diagram of the workforce solutions ecosystem, SIA places staffing firms right at the core. So building an MSP practice from a staffing firm is building on capabilities that are valued by clients. 36% of reported spend in this landscape summary is in master supplier contracts. Again, an emphasis on the staffing supplier. I think this third point is really interesting for any company that would be considering starting a new MSP practice. 39% of individual programs manage spend of $10 million or less. What is that telling you? Well, I think most of us would agree that the largest MSPs are really not looking to manage the smallest programs. So I think that that's a very good indication of that there is a lot of small program spend available, and you can get to the small program spend without having to compete against large MSPs or without disturbing business that you might have with large MSPs. And the fourth point speaks to this directly is 54% of reported contracts, new MSP contracts, were awarded by clients with no previous MSP model in place. And so what does that mean? It means that there's still greenfield out there, right? So if we work from the bottom up and just go through this again really quickly, there's greenfield out there. More than half of the new contracts are being awarded by clients that didn't have an MSP in place. 39% of program spend is in programs of 10 million or less. And across the board, whether in vendor neutral programs or not, staffing suppliers are still very important. So let's take a look at one other piece of research. And this report was titled "The Workforce Solutions Ecosystem 2020 Update." I'm going to take a moment to actually read through this, but then we're going to key in on the bolded section. So staffing firms have broadened their service portfolios, right? So that they can provide or offer clients a much broader range of services other than just temporary staffing. In fact, there's some other research and reports from SIA, especially over the last year, about how, not only is this happening in the market because clients are looking for it, but it's also happening in the market because staffing firms need to broaden their services, particularly in light of COVID-19. So there's really nothing new about staffing firms broadening their services, but this last point in the first paragraph I highlighted or bolded is that MSPs are now becoming well-established offerings for many staffing firms. Okay, and again, this goes beyond the large staffing firms, of course, that have been in the MSP business for maybe 20 years or longer. So this goes on in the second paragraph to talk about how client sophistication has grown, but staffing firm sophistication has grown as well. And it has to for staffing firms. And why? The bolded section here. Partly as a defensive measure to protect themselves from disruption, but also as an offensive move to take advantage of new and fast-growing revenue streams, right? So building an MSP practice can mean really helping defend your position as a staffing firm, but also helping you break into new and fast-growing revenue streams. And I want to talk about that now. So, if you're working in MSP programs as a staffing supplier, and I've seen over the years probably at least 250 to 300 new staffing accounts within MSP programs, right? And how long the sales cycle is, how long it takes to contract and onboard, and go live and get the first requirement, to make the first placement, to really ramp up and get any billing going. And it's usually a really significant amount of time. And in fact, if you're in that business, you also often find out that many of those programs don't end up offering you the staffing opportunity that you think that they do. But certainly, even if they do, it tends to be a very extended ramp up. And why is that? Well, for all the reasons that I mentioned. And then on top of that, what's happening? You're adding one resource into the program and you begin that first billing, and then another, and it's one by one. So it's a little different though when you have an MSP practice or you're doing master vendor business. These can be faster growing revenue streams. So the first thing I'll point out is that the sales cycle that we generally look at is 6 to 12 months. So you might think to yourself, well, does that mean everybody is buying a new MSP every 6 to 12 months? Of course not. In fact, we know that MSP contracts usually last for 3 or 4 years. But if you just started a new MSP contract, or the enterprise or the mid-market company, you're not going to be in that buying cycle right now. When you get into that cycle, it's going to be about 6 to 12 months. And so this could be for any company making a change, or I think more importantly for companies that are still coming into looking for a first generation program. So the sales cycle is not necessarily longer than it is for staffing into enterprise programs. And I'm sure everyone on this call has seen that sometimes it's taken 2 or 3 years to get into an enterprise program, or maybe you've been trying to get in for even longer than that. So we're not looking at a significantly longer sales cycle. The second thing is that contract and implementation can go very quickly. And again, what am I talking about here? I'm really talking more about that blue ocean MSP space. I'm not talking about where the largest programs exist. I'm not even talking about where the second tier of programs exist. I'm talking about lower spend programs, often first generation programs. They can contract and implement very quickly, okay? Don't have the same level of complexity. And you tend to be able to be very close to the customer and all the stakeholders with the customer whose help you need to contract and implement. And then what happens? Your billing starts as soon as the program goes live. You immediately capture the opportunity. Now, of course, the opportunity will expand over time, but you will immediately capture a significant opportunity. It doesn't take 6 months or 12 months or longer to capture that significant opportunity. You capture it as soon as it goes live. And then you can be working on other opportunities within it. So sometimes, and some of these are listed at the right of the slide here, sometimes this means that immediately you're part of the staffing supply base. All right. Generally speaking, smaller spend programs are not looking to be vendor neutral. Those tend to be larger spend programs. So you could immediately be a staffing supplier to that program, maybe the staffing supplier, the preferred supplier. You could offer then or later direct sourcing or RPO or payrolling. Could start right at the very beginning. IC compliance and other services that your firms offer. I think that's the key point here, the direct customer relationship. All right. So if you're a staffing firm, why would you want to build an MSP practice? So that you can get a direct customer relationship. Not always rely on intermediaries for your customers, intermediaries like other MSPs. Of course, you stay in that business, right? Because there's significant business for you in large programs But what about that blue ocean space? Here's an opportunity to get into a new business area that's on the edge of what you already do and actually build staffing clients as well. So if we want to take a look at, what might some of those customers look like? These are real examples of customers for startup MSP practice and what they can be worth. So one example here is a technology firm, had about 200 employees, and they're immediately or near immediately, the contingent workforce spend under management was about $6 million. And $2 million of staffing was captured in the very first year. Now think about that. Sometimes you can be in very large programs. Not sometimes, I mean, oftentimes. You can be added to very large programs and not capture $2 million of spend in your first year. And there are other programs where maybe you never capture $2 million of spend in any year. In this particular program, there were also additional opportunities, and one was capturing approximately $2 million of payrolling spend in the first year. The lifetime value of that customer just to date has probably been about $30 million. Okay. And there really has been very little competition. The customer hasn't gone out to bid to replace the MSP. The customer hasn't looked to add a lot of other staffing suppliers. The customer hasn't looked to replace the payrolling. So it's, very persistent, high quality, profitable business. Another example, a different industry, a retailer, much larger in terms of number of employees. The contingent workforce spend under management was only part of their contingent workforce spend. It actually happened to be about, it was not non-IT spend, and probably about 20 to 25% of their overall spend, okay, captured into one program. Approximately 3 million of that spend we captured as a staffing supplier. Okay, so we're managing 4 million and then also staffing 3 million of it. Again, in a good category, accounting and finance. There was an additional opportunity in the first year to 2 years of a small RPO. The lifetime value of that client to date has been at least 30 million. So again, a very small program. Both of these programs, one that was, if you could go back to that last slide, the first one, the technology firm, was a, smaller company, 200 employees. The second one, the retailer, is a larger company, 4,000 employees, but still a small program, but a lifetime value, that was quite large. And then the third one, a manufacturer, 300 plus employees, $3 million of contingent workforce spend under management, began billing as soon as it went live. About $1 million of staffing captured, but also some perm fees. When I say staffing, I'm talking about contingent staffing, but there were also perm fees. No competition, an opportunity to not just an opportunity, but actual perm fees booked of about $125,000. I think the lifetime value of this customer is probably around 15 million. These are real world customer examples, many others very similar. So how do you get your share of that? Well, this goes back to how you really some of the points about moving from a red ocean to a blue ocean. So you stay working in the red ocean, right? You continue building your staffing business, but you create a plan to build an MSP practice and also grow your staffing business along with it. I think you have to make at least a 1-year commitment of resources. By resources, I mean human resources. Who in your firm is going to work on this? And they may have dual responsibilities, working in the staffing business while working on building the practice. And you have to make a commitment of financial resources. But I also think this third point is really important. And of course, ProcureWise is a technology provider. And in fact, We're one of the industry's only AI-powered unified total talent platforms. But I think the third point is so important because I'll tell you what I've found. And as Jake mentioned, I have co-founded 2 MSPs, and probably the most difficult hurdle, because I worked with CEOs that were visionary. They wanted to build MSP practices or businesses actually while growing the staffing business. They were willing to make the commitment of people, time, money. The toughest thing I think the toughest thing is getting the technology in place that you need. Okay, because again, just like the large MSPs are looking to work on large programs, I think that large VMSs that we know of, tend to have more of an appetite for larger spend programs, right? And maybe they're just really not even set up as well, are agile enough, can make your customers important enough, can make you important enough to help you build an MSP practice in that smaller spend blue ocean space. So this leads me to suggest that if you're interested, let's talk. We have a few things that could be really helpful to you, I think. These are some like structured methodologies that we have. One for assessing the value of an MSP practice to your staffing business, so we can actually help you do that. Or building the business case for an MSP practice in your staffing firm, right? If you're really strongly thinking about doing this, have you really considered some of the alternatives? What else could you do on the edge that might, that would be an alternative? Doing a cost benefit analysis. I'm thinking about the risks, weighing out the pros and cons and things like that. Anyway, we have a structured 7-step methodology for helping you build that business case. And we can also help you create a roadmap. So again, a lot of structure to this. We can be very helpful, and we'd like to offer you a complimentary executive consultation with, if you're an owner, with you, with your executive team, your management team, to really learn more about this and possibly do one of the things that are mentioned in the bullet points there. This would generally be from a 2 to a 3 hour discussion. We share a lot of information, and we can see how we can help you get started. So that's what I have to share with you today. Obviously, I think that that there's tremendous potential for your staffing business if you build an MSP practice. And I guess, Jake, we have about 10 minutes for some Q&A.
Exactly. Perfect. So everybody that's watching the session, thank you again for attending. If you have any questions, feel free to send them in the Q&A session, and we will answer them accordingly. And it looks like we've already got one lined up for you, Jim. So here's the first question. What is your recommendation for how the client pays for the MSP? Most unfamiliar with charges the client nothing and generates fees through sub-vendors to the MSP.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, our position on this and kind of what I've seen historically, right, is that clients are starting, they're looking for different things. If we look at the large MSPs, we can see that there's been a lot of pricing pressure over the years, right? So MSP fees used to be significantly higher than they are today. At the same time, customers are looking for more from their MSPs. That they started looking and saying, well, this is very transactional. I'm getting a lot of what I need really from the VMS. What is the MSP doing for me? So I think the fee model has to take into consideration a lot of things. One is, of course, what the customer is looking for in terms of services. 2 is, what's the customer looking for in terms of a fee model, right? Do they like the idea of percentage on spend? Or are they going to fund it? Is it going to be supplier funded? Do they like the idea of maybe some other type of subscription fee or a flat fee or different kinds of things like that. Now, if you don't have the right technology partner, you're kind of stuck, right? Because you might have a significant VMS fee that you have to take care of. Your VMS provider may only be looking for a percentage of spend and things like that. So I think you have to look at the things that the customer is looking for first. And then you also have to think about how that fits into how you would deliver those services and what you're looking for as a firm. And exactly what it's going to cost you, right? So, and the technology is a really big piece of that. So there's a lot to talk about there. That's one of those kinds of things I think we can take offline for anybody that would like to have a consultation.
There definitely looks like there's some good interest in the chat, so that's great to see. I think we have time for 2 more quick questions. So I'll go ahead and jump on this next one. James, keen to hear your thoughts on how MSPs can grow while keeping interest of stakeholders in mind.
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to take that question to be keeping the interest of the stakeholders with the customer, right? So generally, and again, if we're talking smaller, I think if we're talking smaller spend programs, which is what I'm talking about in terms of starting a new practice or expanding a relatively new practice, I think it's about service levels. Okay, so you tend to be very close to the customer when you're working with a mid-market or or a smaller enterprise. When I say close to the customer, I don't just mean the executive sponsor, or we'll say the actual buyer, somebody that's hands-on with it, but oftentimes to some of the major users, right? So they're looking for high service levels generally, right? In large programs, a lot of things sometimes get pushed out into self-service. But I think in smaller spend programs, you get so close to the customer that they're looking for high levels of service. Of course, it takes resources to deliver those high levels of service. But when you do, you're going to be able to develop more opportunities. That's where you can develop staffing opportunities. That's where you can develop payrolling opportunities. That's where you can develop direct sourcing opportunities. That's how you can develop all of these other opportunities. Why? Because you're learning more about the client. You're getting more engaged with the client. You're getting more buy-in from the client. You're seeing how really you can serve them better.
Great. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. Are the blue ocean opportunities available in the commercial or government space? And we actually had 2 people ask this.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. And I'd say they're available both in the commercial space and in the government space. So I mentioned a couple of different research reports, right? The provider directory. In the provider directory, it denotes if a company is specialized in a certain vertical, right, or really focused on a vertical. For instance, I'd mentioned healthcare. What I didn't mention is that there are really only a few MSPs. I mean, a small number of MSPs that are really focused on government business, right? So, but you do see that growing. Those are programs that have tended to be sort of under the radar. I mean, you see programs for states, of course, where staffing firms have seen those, but you see them for public universities. You see them for counties and municipalities. So there's all kinds of opportunity in the government space for sure. And in the commercial space, there's opportunity. And I would say in the government space, it's from really small to large organizations. And in the commercial space, without doubt, the blue ocean is really in all the underserved areas of the commercial space, right? I mean, I gave examples of companies that only have, 2 to 500 employees maybe, but they have $5 to $10 million of a contingent workforce. I could have given you other examples of companies that I've worked with that have 700 or 1,000 employees, but they have 15 or 20 or $25 million of contingent workforce spend, and they don't have programs. MSPs aren't calling on them. I mean, there is a tremendous underserved market that someone's going to get to soon. And I think that staffing firms can be very well positioned to get to those in that market, to gain the MSP business and to bring staffing business along with it.
Great.
Again, I
Thank
know
you
we're
again.
almost up. I just want to say again that I would be happy to meet with any owner, executive, management team of any staffing firm on our session today. Have an introductory call, or even schedule one of those 2 to 3 hour virtual sessions and really go through some things in depth. So I just want to thank the people who have joined today. And if you'd like to get in touch with me about this offer, it's james.l@procurewise.com.
Thank you, Jim. And for everyone else, watching this session, I also am dropping James's LinkedIn profile. So feel free to connect with him too and continue the conversation there. Jim, thank you again for presenting. I appreciate it. Everyone in the audience, thank you so much for contributing and giving some great questions. Without you guys, our Q&A would be very boring. So we really appreciate your contribution and your interest in today's subject. Our next sessions will begin exactly in about 2 or 3 minutes. So feel free to fill up your cup of coffee, grab something to eat for the next session, and get ready for the next 4 sessions within your agenda tab. So thank you again, and I will see you all soon.
Thank you.